Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Regarding Islamic worship rituals, the misconception I'd like to bring into discussion today relates to this issue of animal sacrifice, and it's basically a question that people raise, and that is, why did the Almighty demand the sacrifice of a human? I'm speaking of Ishmael anhu from the Prophet Abraham. We come to know that the Almighty at one time had ordered one of his greatest prophets, Abraham, to slaughter his son, his only son at that time. And we know that Ishmael was born at a very later age in Abraham's life after a lot of prayers from Abraham. So was the Almighty so cruel so as to demand the slaughter of a son of a prophet that he himself had raised among people? Now, this issue has arisen because we have perhaps failed to grasp the fact that Almighty, when He directed Abraham to do so, His intention was entirely different. Let me explain this when I say that His intention was entirely different. And that is that, first of all, it's to be understood that dreams of the prophets of God, they are primarily a means of instruction from the Almighty for those prophets. When dreams are shown to prophets of God, the issue is that the Almighty wants to train them, to educate them, to instruct them in certain issues. And the other thing is that these dreams are generally symbolic in nature. Facts are symbolized. They signify certain things. They are not to be taken literally. Thus, for example, we know that the dream which has been mentioned regarding the Prophet Joseph in Surah Yusuf, we find that he was the heavenly bodies, for example, the planets and the sun and the moon. He had seen in his dream that they were prostrating themselves before him. They were bowing down before him. Obviously, this was not to be taken literally. He understood that there was a certain symbolism which was implied there. There was a certain signification which was implied there, and he later on explained when his brothers and his mother and his father came to him later on, that he said that this is the interpretation of my dream, telling people that when I saw that the planets and 11 planets and the sun and the moon are prostrating before me, that was not the fact that they're going to actually prostrate before me. It was the fact that they symbolized certain personalities. So it needs to be understood, first of all, that dreams of the Prophet of God, not only are they a means of instruction, they also symbolize certain things. They signify certain things. They are not to be interpreted literally. This is the first thing that needs to be understood. The second thing that needs to be understood is that this particular dream which we are referring to, in which the Almighty instructed His great prophet Abraham to sacrifice his son, was shown to him a number of times, as is evident from the verses of Surah Safat, Inni arafil manam anni asbahuka fanzur maza tara, these famous verses. So in these particular verses also, when the Almighty actually showed Abraham that he was sacrificing his son, as I said, since in dreams facts are not to be taken literally, what is shown is not to be taken literally. It has to be interpreted. There is a certain amount of symbolism that is involved there. And if we study ancient scriptures, what comes very evident is that sacrificing an animal or sacrificing something for God in this manner actually signifies devoting that thing for the cause of God, devoting that person or goat or whatever that we are sacrificing for the cause of God. So when the Almighty actually showed Abraham this dream, his intention was not at all to ask Abraham to slaughter his son. His intention primarily was to tell Abraham that he should devote his son for the cause of the Almighty. So the primary objective was to devote Ishmael for the cause of God, for the Baytullah, as we know from the Quran. So this was the symbolism that was involved. This was the signification that was involved. The Almighty never intended that the Prophet Abraham should slaughter his son. And this is precisely what we can see when the Quran says, when Abraham actually undertook to slaughter his son, the Quran commented on this and said, "Qad saddaqta ruhya." Abraham, you have made this dream come true. It was not required that you act upon this dream the way it was shown to you. So therefore the symbolism was that he should devote his son Ishmael for the cause of God. And Abraham, he actually he did not want to, he didn't like to interpret this dream so as to show that it was a certain interpretation that he's going to go after. He actually, in his own fervor and his own enthusiasm, he went after following the dream in the literal sense, and whatever the dream said to him, whatever message it conveyed to him, Abraham started to follow that message in the literal sense. So the Almighty had to stop him and said, although this is something very, very commendable that he had not even thought of interpreting the dream, he had started to do as the Almighty said, but the Almighty stopped him and said, "Kad saddaqtu ruya." You have made the dream come true. This is not required. So in a nutshell, it needs to be understood that the Almighty never asked for Ishmael's sacrifice. This question should not arise that the Almighty is a cruel being because he asked one of his great prophets and messengers to sacrifice his son for his own sake. This never was the case. This was a symbolic, this whole gesture was symbolic. As I said, dreams of the prophets of God, they must not be interpreted literally. They have a certain significance. They symbolize certain facts. And in this case, the symbolism was Abraham was asked to actually devote his son when he grows up for the cause of God. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين والمسلمات.